Fatalis is one of the first Elder Dragons and the final boss of the very first Monster Hunter game. Design-wise, he is quite literally a traditional dragon, having 4 legs, 2 wings, as well as a long neck and tail. Fatalis being a stereotypical dragon might seem boring, but it actually makes him quite unique within the Monster Hunter universe, as most other monsters and Elder Dragons tend to be quite supernatural, with crazy abilities and design elements. This sets Fatalis apart as something different, something stronger. Before we get into his fight, we must discuss the circumstances behind it, especially for the earlier games. Fatalis was essentially a secret boss. He was never featured in any trailers, nor was he mentioned in any strategy guides. He didn't even have an official icon, and this went on for a very long time. This was supposed to encourage players to interact and share tactics with each other. In the first Monster Hunter game, Fatalis was online only, which means he cannot be fought in that game anymore officially. When the servers were up, he would be unlocked by completing every single online quest, as well as fulfilling other conditions. According to this GameFAQs guide written in the year 2005, some players speculated that 50 Rathalos and Rathian had to be hunted for his quest to appear. This was later believed to be false, and some said that the Elder Dragon Lao Shan Lung needed to be defeated first. As said before, Fatalis was so elusive that people were debating and arguing the ways to unlock him, and in the end still weren't 100% sure. The guide came to the conclusion that 100 total wyverns had to be hunted in order for the quest to be unlocked, including Rathalos, Rathian, Gravios, Diablos, Plesioth, or Lao Shan Lung. The guide also emphasised that offline kills do not count. There are 4 Fatalis quests, each of them taking place in the arena of Castle Shrade. Fatalis lives there, and it's the centre of a kingdom that he allegedly destroyed. Each quest is 15 minutes long, and the main differences between them are the availability of weapons within Castle Shrade. The first quest only gives you the balisters, while the 4th also provides cannons, a gate that can inflict massive damage, as well as a Dragonator. You don't have to complete them all, or in any particular order. They simply determine what castle weaponry you have access to. Having access to the Dragonator and cannons can make it easier to take down Fatalis, while players who feel more confident can take the lowest fee quest and potentially get the job done while saving more money. You might be thinking, it's a 1000 zenny difference between quests 1 and 4. It's not that big of a difference, why not go for the biggest quest every time? Well, Monster Hunter for the PlayStation 2 was a very different game to what we know now. In recent games, we have things like automatic farms and item packs to give us zenny. But back then, resources were pretty scarce, and so paying for the most expensive Fatalis quest would only really be done if players felt they needed the extra weapons to defeat him. Anyway, each quest is 15 minutes. You might feel like it's not a lot of time, and you would be right, it's practically nothing. It is impossible to kill him with the amount of health he has. However, the objective of these quests isn't just to kill Fatalis, they also let you repel him. If you deal enough damage to him, he flies away, the quest counts as a success, and you get a few quest rewards. And when you do another Fatalis quest, he has the same amount of health as last time, and retains any part break damage. So the objective is to wear him down, repel and repel. After a few quests, you finally kill him, and have access to 9 calves, which is a very high amount. The whole system of fighting a monster repeatedly to wear it down and kill it might be familiar to many of you, as the idea was incorporated into Monster Hunter World, with Kolv Taroth and Safi Jiva. As for Fatalis, having multiple quests didn't return for future generations, and the repel system was last seen in games like Monster Hunter 4. While Elder Dragons could be repelled in that game, they didn't really have so much health that you couldn't beat them in one round. Monster Hunter Freedom does have multiple Fatalis quests, but they all have a 15-minute time limit, with Fatalis himself leaving at the 25-minute mark. Future games in the series give you at least 35 minutes. Displaying things related to the first game is pretty hard for me because the online servers have been shut down. But luckily, Fatalis is fightable in the Freedom games, so now we can finally discuss his moveset. Like most first generation monsters, it's incredibly basic. His grounded attacks have him either shoot a fireball, inch slightly forward, or slam his body down as he goes into all fours. From there he can either stand up, shoot more fireballs, or perform what is arguably his signature move, the snap and drag, where he bites and moves forward at the same time. The attack does massive damage on its own, but what is slightly funny is that his hitbox is active across his whole body. If you are touching the tip of his tail, it will be as if you were hit by the whole attack. Speaking of his tail, whenever Fatalis turns to face a hunter, it swings behind him and deals damage to anyone on his side or behind him. It cannot be severed and has a pretty hard hit zone. Fatalis will often take off into the air, shooting fireballs below. It's impossible to reach him with melee weapons, and this is where the ballistas come in, knocking him down to the ground when he's out of reach. Fatalis might have a basic moveset, but in the earlier games, so did we. Our movesets and options were also limited, and unlike us, Fatalis deals huge amounts of damage with every attack, so the fight is a huge endurance round between hunter and monster, with the multiple stages emphasizing this. In Monster Hunter G, Fatalis is joined by the very first variant in the series, the Crimson Fatalis. He has a red hue and an overgrown horn, and he lives deep in volcanic regions. Depending on what game you are playing, he will begin the fight by immediately dive bombing you, as seen with this cutscene. He mostly has the same attacks, but sometimes he will smack you with his front legs as well as dive at you from the ground. His signature move has him scream into the sky and summon meteors that deal heavy damage. Like Fatalis, he will fly into the sky to shoot fireballs, but Crimson can also dive down onto hunters, and this is indicated by meteors falling while he's flying. Crimson Fatalis later went on to be the final boss of Monster Hunter 2, where again he was online only and thus no longer accessible, which is why it's fortunate that he and regular Fatalis are in Freedom Unite. In Monster Hunter DOS, they are joined by yet another variant, which makes Fatalis the first and so far only monster to have two. Meet the White Fatalis. This variant has a beard, and instead of fire makes use of lightning attacks which he can fire from his mouth. White is implied to be an older Fatalis, and to set him apart from the other variants, he has his own unique theme. White Fatalis mostly has the same attacks as the other two, but his claw swipe is charged with lightning. Instead of meteors, White summons lightning bolts from the sky. When he becomes enraged, his chest begins crackling with energy and glowing, and his attacks deal even more damage. Like Crimson, he can dive bomb from the sky or the ground. When he's around 50% health, any part of his body that isn't a weak point becomes hard, causing weapons to bounce off or deal reduced damage, and this persists until he is close to death. None of the three dragons returned for Monster Hunter 3. Fatalis is known as the Black Dragon, but 3 introduced Alatreon, who is known as the Blazing Black Dragon. Like Fatalis, he was online only, not being featured in any marketing material, and was extremely powerful. However, we are not going to talk about Alatreon today. No, instead we will discuss another Black Dragon introduced in 3 Ultimate. Meet the Smelting Black Dragon, Miralis. He is essentially the stand-in for Fatalis this generation, having the same body structure and similar attacks. He is kind of like a distant cousin. However, he does have many differences from Fatalis. For one, he is much bigger, towering over us. Instead of wings, Miralis has 2 funnels that pour molten rock from them. Throughout the fight, they land on you similar to Crimson Fatalis' meteors and can cause heavy damage. They can also pour out from his neck and tail. Miralis lives in the Tainted Sea because he needs the ocean to cool him down in order to prevent overheating. This means that during battle, he will often move between the land and the ocean. His body is covered in magma boils that serve as weak points. Hit them hard enough and they eventually shatter, causing his body to dry out. When he's on land, standing up, we can only hit his stomach and his back leg boils, but when underwater, we can travel between different elevations to hit the boils on his upper body. Overall, he tends to be a much larger but slower Fatalis, who doesn't fly, and we can battle on the land or the sea, which, to be honest, makes him the perfect final boss for 3 Ultimate. In terms of moveset, he has many of Fatalis' old attacks. He can breathe fire, perform the snap and drag, expel molten rocks from his wings but also blast them into the sky, causing them to rain down like meteors similar to Crimson Fatalis. Many of the animations for Fatalis' old attacks have been smoothed out with Dire, looking much more natural this time. Dire has a new attack where he lifts his tail, slams it down and swings it around. Dire Miralis is capable of charging a huge explosion that deals massive damage. When on all fours, he will often turn and reverse, and it allows you a chance to access his higher weak points while fighting on land. He also has an armor mode like White Fatalis that activates at half health and persists until he's almost dead. Dire has an ultimate attack where he curls up and charges. When he is ready, he unleashes a huge meteor shower, but you can prevent it by dealing enough damage, which causes him to fall to the ground. Because underwater combat is currently exclusive to Monster Hunter 3 and 3 Ultimate, Dire Miralis hasn't returned, and it is uncertain whether we will ever see him again. Not to worry though, because Fatalis returned for Monster Hunter 4. As stated earlier in the video, many of the mechanics from the first game and Freedom are absent here, so it is pretty much a standard Elder fight in a special arena. You can repel him, but he doesn't have so much health that it's necessary to do so. Castle Shraid in this game has ballistas, a cannon, and a Dragonator. It's also fairly small compared to the earlier iteration. Fatalis keeps a lot of Dire Miralis' attacks, particularly the tail sweep and the new animations. He can swipe his claw like his variants and perform some entirely new attacks. He can now spread a flammable powder that ignites after a second, and he has access to a flamethrower attack that he sweeps from right to left or vice versa, which he can perform while moving forwards or backwards. Fatalis flies much lower in this game, making it possible to hit his legs while you're on the ground, but because he can freely dive bomb, he's a bit trickier to deal with. Crimson Fatalis is also in the base game, being Event Quest exclusive. Again, he begins the fight by dive bombing immediately. His meteors tend to land much closer to his body, making them more of a hazard for players who fight close to him. He has most of Fatalis' new changes, but also bears similarities to Dire Miralis, as he can also perform the huge explosion as well as his meteor charge. Crimson can also spread blast powder around similarly to Teostra. With the release of Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, several changes were made for G rank. Fatalis became Event Quest exclusive. During combat, he is much faster and gains Crimson's huge explosion, which he can now follow with a dive bomb. White Fatalis makes his return, being part of the game but being released post-launch in an event quest. Aside from receiving a graphical overhaul, he gains the changes of the other Fatalises with some new twists. The huge fire explosion and powder attack are now lightning based, and White isn't capable of performing the flamethrower attack. His armor mode now activates whenever he is enraged, making him harder to deal with. In addition to this, he has an ultimate attack where he flies towards the eclipse in the sky and summons a huge barrage of lightning that tracks each player and does heavy damage. From there he dive bombs from the sky. Visually, it's pretty spectacular. Crimson Fatalis is available to fight in the high rank village, marking the first time ever a Fatalis has ever been fightable in a single player quest. In G rank, he is available in the base game, but something is very different. Upon loading the quest, you are greeted to a new cutscene. G rank Crimson Fatalis is visually different, being much brighter with glowing claws, horns and spikes. Each step he takes spreads fire on the ground. He emanates so much heat that solar flares now dash across the arena, something that doesn't normally happen, and there is a heat haze covering the arena. For reasons unexplained, this Crimson Fatalis is very different to the high rank one. He has a different appearance, a unique theme, and many other changes that set him apart from both high rank and the other two Fatalis. He gains a brand new attack where he can send heat waves out with his wings that knock hunters over and deal steady damage, something similar to Iceborne Lunastra. If you are in contact with his feet when he moves, you are set on fire. G rank Crimson gives off so much heat that it causes his body to glow while also affecting the natural environment around him. But when enraged, he becomes even faster, deals even more damage, gets G rank Fatalis combos, and he gives off so much heat that his entire body glows. The Fatalis trio returned for the expansion of Monster Hunter Generations, being G rank exclusive and thus identical to their 4 Ultimate versions. The exception to this is Crimson Fatalis, who is instead the old high rank version with the standard Fatalis music. The Super one remains exclusive to 4 Ultimate. This Crimson, like the high rank one, is essentially a standard G rank Fatalis but with blast powder and the ability to summon meteors. White Fatalis received a name change, now being known as Old Fatalis, which again is further confirmation that he is an elderly version. This also marks the first time the trio can be fought on a home console since the release of Monster Hunter DOS. Fatalis skipped World, but returned for Iceborne's very last update. Crimson and White didn't come with him, but regardless, this Fatalis probably received the most changes compared to any other returning monster in the entire series. Once again, let us discuss the circumstances behind the fight. For starters, Fatalis is no longer a secret. He has an icon, and there was a whole trailer dedicated to his addition. Him not being secret didn't start with Iceborne though. Black Dragons as a whole were officially revealed to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the series, with Fatalis being featured in this art with all the flagships at the time. Iceborne had a fairly big endgame at launch, which had players grind in the guiding lands for hours on end to augment their gear with special effects like lifesteal, as well as battle stronger and stronger monsters such as the Silver Rathalos or Ruin and Nergigante. But then the title updates began. Rojang was the very first, and he was a huge difficulty spike. He was followed by Stygian Zinogre and Safi Jiva, who came with a whole new endgame of grinding random but very powerful weapons. Master rank Khov Taroth came later with something similar. Due to the nature of title updates, each monster should not only provide challenge for the player, but they should make the fight worthwhile. Safi and Khov were pretty difficult and came with pretty exceptionally strong gear. Furious Rajang and Raging Brachydios arrived later, adding even more challenge and some of the best blast weapons in the game. Later on, Alatreon was added, proving to be a massive wall for players for many reasons. So at this point, the vast majority of Iceborne players have done insane amounts of post-game grinding, both base game and update content, taking on harder and harder challenges and upgrading their gear to be insanely powerful. So whatever came next would not only have to withstand their gear, but also provide a challenge like nothing they've ever seen. Enter Fatalis, remade from the ground up to become one of the hardest fights in the entire series. He has received a slight redesign, with body proportions being altered, namely his wings being much larger. Castle Strayed returns, also remade. There are cannons and ballistas, with a roaming ballista and dragonator cut off by a barrier. The special assignment has you fight him alongside an NPC, and to beat him you must clear 25% of his health. This is merely a rappel, and the real quest comes right afterwards. From there you can SOS teammates. If you abandon the quest then you will start from the beginning, but it will be a normal quest. The average monster health in Iceborne for a standard monster like Rathalos is 20,000. Elder dragons like Kushala have 25,000 and Lunastra has 30,000. Safi Jiva has 40, which is quite a lot, but Fatalis has a grand total of 57, and that is when you are playing solo. It is a higher number when you have friends with you. While you have 5 feints, you only have 30 minutes to kill him, and it has to be a kill, no repels like in the first game. One last thing is that Fatalis hits extremely hard. All his attacks deal heavy damage, and you need to be at your A game to beat him. Fatalis has all his attacks from the older games, but they have been massively sped up, and chain into each other much more fluidly. Many of his old attacks have been reworked, and have new variations. His old explosion sweep has him plant flames into the ground that explode after a delay. He can do this to his sides and in front of him at varying ranges. Fatalis can slam his body down, either on his own or in retaliation to an attack, and if you are hit, it sends you into a hard knockdown. After slamming his body down, Fatalis will spend an extended period of time on all fours, using different attacks such as his old sweeping flamethrower and the snap and drag, but also new attacks such as this rapid crawl. He shares some attacks with his standing mode such as the fireballs and delayed explosions, and like for ultimate, he can do a nuke attack. It once again does heavy damage, and the recoil is usually enough to make him stand on 2 legs again. It is worth mentioning, Fatalis can only be flint shot when on all fours. If you attempt to do it while he's standing, he simply goes down on all fours again, and his head doesn't take damage. When standing, Fatalis can use different kinds of flamethrower attacks. One he sweeps upwards that knocks you away, one he breathes around left and right to catch players away from him, and another he fires downwards after a delay. This specific one is very dangerous, as it doesn't knock you back but it hits you repeatedly, forcing you to get away to avoid massive damage. A major new addition Fatalis has received is this new breath attack that some have dubbed the Cone. He gets on all fours and blasts a cone of fire for multiple seconds. Like the other breath attack, it does steady damage and doesn't knock you back, so it's very easy to die to it. It can be blocked by physical objects as well as shielded weapons with guard up. This attack, while dangerous, does leave Fatalis' head very open, which will be important for later. But he also knows this, because once the attack is done, he drops a delayed fire explosion on the ground, hitting people who stayed there too long. When Fatalis is enraged, he can perform a longer ranged bite, and like in the older games, he will follow a nuke with a dive bomb. He can still swing his tail, but now he can aim it at hunters. After Fatalis is at 75% health, he roars and flies away before breathing flames into the arena. You need to take cover in the corner, as Fatalis unleashes a huge wave of stronger flames that instantly kill you and begin to melt the cover. When the flames clear, the music changes as you discover the barrier is gone, revealing the Dragonator and the roaming ballista. Welcome to phase 2. Fatalis will now begin to fly, mostly using fireballs and fire breath to attack from above. It's important to draw him back to the ground, and the best way to do that is either to use a smoke bomb so he lands to look for you, shoot some dragon pods which will make him try and dive bomb you, or use the roaming ballista for the same effect. Fatalis will generally start chaining attacks together at a faster rate, making him trickier to take advantage of. He gains a new delayed explosion that he uses in a single spot in front of him, which he can also do at close or long range. He can also launch fireballs with greater accuracy. Fatalis starts phase 2 airborne, but he can also take flight at random intervals from now on, using his different aerial attacks. At 50% health, he prepares for another flame barrage. This time, the way to avoid it is by running behind this gate and shutting it. In multiplayer, it's entirely possible to shut your friends out, leaving them to the mercy of the flames. If the full barrage hits you, everyone dies, so if somebody is taking too long, you will have to sacrifice them. The intensity is strong enough to melt the barrier down, so you can't rely on it for when he unleashes the next one, but that is the least of your worries. Why? Because at 50% health, Fatalis enters a new state. Do you remember Silver Rathalos and Gold Rathion's enhanced fire? Fatalis has it too, and every single fire attack deals more damage and has bigger explosions, practically a one-shot. He won't leave this fire state on his own, and winning the fight like this is close to impossible. Now here's the thing, it can be prevented, and if triggered, stopped. Breaking his horn once reduces its intensity, and breaking the second reduces it again to normal levels. If you haven't been trying to break his horns the whole fight, it's time to abandon quest. From the very beginning, the goal of every player hoping to beat Iceborne Fatalis should be to break the horns. It's your only hope of surviving after halfway. Once you find out about this, it changes the entire dynamic of the fight. Not only are you racing the 30-minute clock, but every single blow you land on Fatalis that isn't his head is a race against yourself, since you're advancing him towards a state where the odds are too stacked in his favour. You need to be hitting his head at every moment it's available. Every time Fatalis is on all fours, it's an opportunity to strike his head. Every second he is flying is another second wasted. You have to tenderize the head, and then find opportunities to deal the most damage you can, and the best one people have identified is the cone attack. Pretty much every weapon has an opportunity to inflict their highest damaging attacks or combos, and if you can bait it out by standing in front of him, you'll have it broken in no time. Now even if you've broken the horns, you still have to buckle down, because the fight is still harder than phase 2 at this point. Fatalis gains a pin attack where he quickly rushes up to you. From there, you get stuck to his chest, which is now extremely hot, causing you to stick to it. Eventually he notices, and throws you off. This pin is particularly insidious, because he flaps his wings beforehand, making you think he's going to fly, but instead he tries to pull a fast one on you. He gains several brand new fire attacks. He will now perform 2 breath sweeps to each side, one after the other, as well as an extremely deadly 360-degree sweep that goes all the way around. There is no way to move past it. I believe it also hits multiple times, so if you somehow tank it with a mantle or counter, you'll still be hit. Fatalis can also use this in retaliation to an attack. Sometime during phase 3, the Dragonator becomes available. Hit Fatalis with it and you'll do heavy damage and trigger a music change. He no longer follows his nukes with a dive bomb. Instead, he will follow it up with multiple nukes in different directions. And it's worth mentioning that at this point in the fight, every single fire-based attack will leave fire burning on the ground, dealing slight damage as you walk over it. Fatalis will proceed to perform 3 more flame barrages at different intervals, 25%, 10% and 5% health respectively. There's nowhere to hide, so this time you must rush to wherever Fatalis is hovering and stand beneath him. Keep surviving all his attacks, deal enough damage, and eventually you'll see victory. The Iceborne iteration of Fatalis is objectively the best version. I know I should try and be subjective about this, but it's really hard to argue. The fight is really well done and a fantastic end to Iceborne. They gave him so many new attacks and really demonstrated why he's the strongest monster. He's very difficult, probably one of the hardest monsters in the series. Despite this, he's also pretty fair. He has so many openings, and once you take the time to learn him, beating him is very much possible. However, I think limiting the fight to half an hour felt very much like artificial difficulty. I think the flame barrages were a cool way to demonstrate Fatalis' complete mastery of fire, while also being fantastic indicators of how much health he has left. Watching the gate melt down at 50% is genuinely a really cool experience. I also like how the fight kind of tries to do what the first game did, with multiple weapons in Shade, this time making them available as the fight progressed. Fatalis in canon has always been implied to be the strongest monster ever, but it's been super hard to believe up until now. Not only were his abilities in older games fairly unimpressive, but the fight was never really engaging, and he didn't receive many changes until Iceborne. I would say he's at his absolute worst in Generation's Ultimate, where you can fight him, as well as strong, actually fun monsters like Nakakos and Artelkar, who also show off fairly impressive abilities that make you wonder, wouldn't they trounce this guy? Iceborne Fatalis actually gives me the impression that this guy could destroy a whole kingdom, and the only others who have been able to do that for me are Old Fatalis and 4 Ultimate Crimson, so let's discuss them for a moment. Crimson was alright, but the 4U G-Rank version felt dangerous, downright terrifying. You got the impression that the world would end if this guy ever left the volcano. In universe, I'm still not 100% sure why he exists, and it's regrettable that this version never returned for Generation's Ultimate, as it would have been cool to see him on the big screen, and it did wonders in making him feel different from the standard Fatalis. Old Fatalis also felt pretty powerful, even if he can't yet meet his full potential. His red lightning has never been seen by any other monster, and his ultimate Sky Strike is still such a cool moment. All this talk about Fatalis almost made me forget about Miralis. His return is entirely dependent on whether or not they bring back underwater combat. In terms of design and abilities, he is really cool, but I prefer Crimson Fatalis, as Dia is just too slow and too big. I definitely want to see him back though. Things like his armor mode give me the impression he is stronger than both Crimson and Black Fatalis, possibly rivaling Old. Overall, I say the Iceborne version is the best and a fantastic revolution for the monster. I'm looking forward to seeing his variants and possibly cousin remade like this in the future. Which Fatalis is your favourite? What kind of changes would you like to see made to the other Fatalis variants as well as Miralis? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video, thank you for 10,000 subscribers, and have a good day.